We're here on the top of Daf Yudam and Aleph, and we're up to the second line. Uparsoi minolon demiyefes ka'asu. We'd assumed that the Parsiim were descendants of Yefes, and Yaftel Kim Yefes teaches us that Ein el hashchina shora el bi'ole shem, and that's why the bias rishon of Shlomo Melech, which is Ole Shem, that's even greater, superior to the bias Sheni, which was given the okay to rebuild the bias through the Persians at the time of Cyrus. Tichsiv, because Pasuk says in Bereshis, in Perek Yud, B'nei Yefes, Gomer, Umagog, Umadai, V'Yavan, V'Suval, Umeshech, V'Siras. And we're going to see that this list of the Bnei Yefes, of the generations of Yefes, include Madai. And when we go through all of them, it's Gomer, Zeger Mamya, and Magog Ze Kandia. And these are various locations, countries, geographical locations on the face of the earth. Again, their names have changed over the course of time. And then we have Madai Kimashmo, that's Madai. And we have Yavan, Zomakandia, and Tuval Zebes Unaiki, Meshech, Zumusia, Tiras, Pligiba, Rabbi Simai, Verabonon, Yamrile, Rabbi Simai, Verabonon, Chadomar Zobes Traki, and Chadomar Zeporas. In any event, we see that Paras and Madai are descendants of Yefes. Now, I'm going to read through this Amud very, very quickly. I gave a shir on this, which is posted on YU Torah, and there we went into a little bit more detail. The English translation has a little bit more of a history about the different nations and their changes in name and their locations in Africa, in Asia, and in Europe. So we're going to do a quick job, and then we're going to pick up the sugya here on the bottom with regard to mezuzah. That's the main sugya for today and perhaps tomorrow as well. Savto v'rama v'savtocha, and this goes to the other son of Noach. Until now we've been dealing with Yefes, now we're dealing with Cush. And Cush is the Bechar of Cham, Shem Cham v'Yefes. Tani Rav Yosef, in the Rav Yosef's price, it says Sakistan, Gvaryasa, Visakistan, Brisa. There are two types or areas of this city or nation. One is inside the other nation, Ben Chadal Chadamea Parsi, and there's a distance of approximately 250 miles between one and the other, Vakefa, Alpha Parsi. And their outer circumference is as large as 1,000 parsa. Okay, so there's the outer Sakistan, the inner Sakistan, and we're talking about a circumference of 1,000 parsa, which is approximately 3,000 miles. V'tehi reishis mamlachto Bavel v'erech v'abad v'kalna. So this is a reference to Nimrod, and Bavel Kimashma'ah. Bavel is Babylonia, Erech Ze or Richus, Abad Ze Baskar. And again, these are not names that we're familiar with. Kalna Ze Nofer Ninfe. Okay, then it says, Mina Oretz Hahu Yotz Ashur. Then he traveled out to Ashur to expand his kingdom. Tani Rav Yosef, Ashur Ze Silak. Vayiven es Ninveh. Here we're going to have machlokas what Ninveh is. Ve'es Rechovos Ir. Ve'es Kelach. Ninveh Kimashma'ah. That's the capital of Assyria. Rechovos Ir. Zopras. Demeshan. Kola Zopras. Divursiv. Ve'es Resen. Back to the pasuk. Ve'es Bein Ninveh or Bein Kelach. Hi Ha'ir Agdola. Resen ze aktasvon ha'ir hagdola hi ha'ir hagdola ein yodea im ninveh ha'ir hagdola im resen ha'ir hagdola. It's not clear which of the two is being referred to as the great city. But True Omer, we have another pasuk, and this is a pasuk in Yona. There it says, "V'ninveh ha'isa ir gidola le'elkim malach shloshes yomim." It was a gigantic metropolis. Have Omer, this teaches me that Ninveh hi ha'ir ha'gidola. V'sham achimon, these are the giants. Sheshai v'salmai yulidei anak. And Tana, we learned in the Brayso, achimon miyumon sheba'achem. Amongst these giants that are listed, he's the most exceptional, most powerful one. And Sheshai shemesim es ha'aretz b'shchitus. He would walk on the ground and ruin the earth. That's how gigantic he was. Talmai shemesim es ha'aretz plumim plumim. When he walked on the ground, he made the earth into furrows and furrows. Dover acher achimon bona anas. Sheshai bona alosh, Talmai bona talbush, and Yulidei Hanak Shamanikim Hachama B'Komosa. And they make the sun into a necklace, as if the sun surrounds their necks because they're so tall. Amar Rabbi Yeshua, Amar Rebbe, Asida Romi Shetipol Biad Paras. The Gemara is preoccupied here with the question of the relationship between Rome and Persia. According to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Rome will fall and be conquered by Persia. Shenemar, and here he bases himself on a pasuk in Yirmiyahu Navi, Lachein Shimu Atzas Hashem Shayatz El Edom. Edom is Rome. Umachshavosov Asher Choshav El Yoshvei Teiman Im Lo Yischavun Tzeiri Atzon Im Lo Yasim Aleim Nivehem. So here the counsel of Hashem, he has devised against Edom and his thoughts that he has conceived against the dwellers of Teiman. The youngest of their flock will indeed drag them off. He will indeed devastate their dwellings. So this is a statement that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, in the name of Rebbe, assumes that the youngest of the flock here refers to Persia. And Maskif La, Rabbi Bar Ula, my mashba the heights at Son Paras, who, how do you know that the youngest of the flock is a reference to Paras? With Siv, and this is based on a pasuk in Sefer Daniel, Ha'ayla Shara'isa, etc. Malchi, Madai, Uparas. The horned ram that you shall see, which is a symbol of the kings of Madai and Paras, and you see that it's called the young flock, the Ema Yavam, but maybe it's a reference to Greece. We have a pasuk here in Daniel that seems to indicate that Greece is likened to a goat, the youngest of the flock, therefore could refer to Greece. And the Gemara now goes back to Kisolik Rav Chaviva bar Surmaki. When he came to Eretz Yisrael, Amra Kameda Hu Rabbanon, he made a statement in front of the Rabbanon, and this has to do with the kasha here of Rabba Bar Ula Amarle. So the Rabbanon told Rav Chaviva, Mandalo Yoda Peruche Kroi Mosif Tiyuvdal Rebbe, someone who doesn't know the simple meaning of a pasuk, and he raised a challenge to Rebbe. In other words, Rabbi Bar Ula has no basis in his kasha, because my tzir atzon, what is the phrase youngest of the flock? Zutra diachohi, the youngest of the brothers of Yefes, which is Tiras. As we identified earlier, Yefes is Tiras, the Tani Rav Yosef Tires, Zeporas. Amar Rabbar Chanam Rav Yochanan Mishum Rav Yehuda bar Eloi. Asida Romi Shetipol Biad Paras. Rome will fall into the hands of Persia. Kal v'chomer. Uma migdash rishon shebeno b'nei Shem v'chrivu Kazdiim. If the Kazdiim, which is an ancient people, was able to destroy the Bais Rishon that was built by Shlomo HaMelech, and yet Naflu Kazdiim B'Ar Parsiim, and the Parsiim conquered the Kazdiim, which means that the Parsiim were sent by Hashem in order to destroy the nation that destroyed the first Migdash, is Migdasheni Shebnoam Parsiim Vechrivu Romiim, Eino Din Sheyiplu Romiim Biad Parsiim. And now the second base of Migdash, which was built by the Parsiim, and now the Romans come and they destroy it. Certainly, isn't it sensible to say that the Romans would fall into the hands of the Parsiim? Omar Rav, Asida Parsha Tipo Biad Romi. The exact opposite opinion. He holds that, on the contrary, Persia will fall into the hands of Rome. Amru Le Rav Kahana Rav Asi Rav, they objected, Bonoi Biad Sosre. Could it be that Persia that built the Beis Hamikdash would now fall into the hands of Rome, who destroyed the Beis Hamikdash? That's not justice. Amr Lahu in Gzeras Melachi. There is a higher calling of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a decree of the king. And even though justice would be served best, according to human understanding, if the destroyers would fall into the hands of the builders, however, history is not dictated by human understanding, but rather by the dictates of God. And to understand God, that's beyond the scope of human comprehension. But the Benayahu goes into detail here about the fact that Cyprus, although he allowed for the building of the walls of the Beis Hamikdash, he did it in a way that he could easily set it on fire. In other words, it appears on the surface as if the Persians were the great builders of the Mikdash, but as a matter of fact, their true selves, they were not really builders, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided that they would fall into the hands of Rome. Amri Amalu Inu Nami Hakasasri Beiknishta. That the Persians, although maybe they didn't destroy the Beis Hamikdash, they built the second Mikdash, but nevertheless they destroyed many synagogues. Tanya Nami Hachi Asida Paras. Here's the support for Rav Shetipo Biad Romi. Chada, number one, because Sasri Beiknisha Viod Zeres Melachi Sheyipo Bonim Biad Sosri. Diom Rav Yehuda Marav Ein Ben David Ba. 9 months, which is the time that a mother will carry the baby until she gives birth. And we're going to base ourselves on a pasuk in Micha, Shenemar, Lachen Yitneim Ad Eis Yoleda Yolda V'Yeser Achav Yeshuvun Al Bnei Yisrael. Tanu Rabbanan Kol Lishkos. Okay, now we start the sugya for today. And this is the sugya of mezuzah. The question is, the Kohen Gadol was quarantined, taken out of his house for 7 days before Yom Kippur into the Lishkas Farhedrin. Was there a requirement of putting up a mezuzah in the Lishkas HaFarhedrin? And this is going to lead us to a discussion about other Lishkos in the Mikdash, a discussion about Sukkah for the 7 days of Sukkot, and in general, a question about a winter home as opposed to a summer home or vice versa, a home that you're obligated to go into, but you didn't go there out of your own free will, temporary houses. What is the mechayev of Beischa as far as the Chiyuv Mezuzah is concerned? We quote now a brisa with regard to the Lishkas Farhedrin, Kol Lishakos, Shoyv Migdash Lo Hoya Behen Mezuzah Chutz Mi Lishkas Farhedrin, Shahoya Ba Beistira Lekohen. All the other chambers in the Beis Hamikdash and the entire complex were not used for dwelling purposes. They didn't require mezuzah. But there's one exception, and that's Lishkas Farhedrin, which was a base dira, at least for the 7 days, the week before Yom Kippur, for the Kohen Gadol. And therefore, it requires a mezuzah, because it is a base dira. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, v'lo kama l'shakos hayu b'migdash ha'olam base dira, v'lo haya lahem mezuzah. It doesn't make sense to say that if you have a place that's used as a temporary dwelling, it requires a mezuzah, because there were other places within the Migdash complex, various lishakos, which means chambers, and there was shomrim, there were guards who would sleep in those places within the temple complex, and there were chambers that were used for a dwelling place, and yet there was no requirement of a mezuzah in all those lishakos. So how then can you tell me that lishkas farhedrin should require mezuzah? Ela lishkas farhedrin gzera hoisa. The entire entity of a requirement of mezuzah in lishkas farhedrin is only a derabanan, and the Gemara is going to explain later on why is it that the Rabbanan required a mezuzah in the lishkas farhedrin. But you cannot assume, says Rabbi Yehuda to the Tanakama this price, so that in a temporary dwelling place you require mezuzah, because all the chambers in the Migdash could lend themselves to temporary dwelling places. And the Kohanim and the Leviim that stood guard on the Migdash, just like a palace required soldiers, and several of these chambers, the shakos, were used by these guards who occupied them at night, and that's where they slept at night, and yet we don't require mezuzah. So you see that a temporary dwelling does not require mezuzah. Mishkas farhedrin is a separate exception to the rule, a category of a mezuzah d'Rabbanan. We'll see exactly why later on. My time at Rabbi Yehuda. What was the basis of Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that the lishkas farhedrin on a doraisa level does not require a mezuzah? Amar Rabba, Kasav Rabbi Yehuda kol bayis she'eino asul yimos hachamel yimos hagshamim eino bayis. In order to consider something a chalul shem bayis, to generate a chiyuv mezuzah, we need a structure that's a bayis the whole year round. And even if you'd have a structure, says Rabbi Yehuda, that's designated for use and dwelling for half of the year round, for the winter or the summer months, it would not be chayiv in mezuzah. It's got to be the whole year. Lishkas farhedrin was only used as a dwelling place for 1 week, so for sure it would not generate a chiyuv mezuzah deoraisa. And if you talk about the other lishakos, then Rabbi Yehuda understood that these other lishakos were only occupied at night, not during the day, and that's similar to the case of a winter home or a summer home. It would not generate a chiyuv mezuzah. And the case of farhedrin, as we said before, is an exception to the rule, and it's a separate gzera d'Rabbanan. Now, again, according to the Tanakama, this brisa, he would agree that those other shakos did not require a mezuzah, even though lishkas farhedrin did. So the answer is, if they only went into these dwelling places, these chambers, the Kohanim Leviim who stood guard only at night, that's not considered a base dira. But farhedrin, where the Kohen Gadol was there for day and night, 24/7 for 7 days, that is considered a base dira that requires a mezuzah. Rabbi Yehuda L'Shitasa says no, it's got to be a full year round, except for the Drabanan in the case of Lishkas farhedrin. I'm going to prove to you that a winter home is considered a home, and so is Soma home vaksiv. And he quotes the pasuk in Sefer Amos, and it says, "V'kesi beis hachoref al beis hakayitz." And here, the Navi Amos is promising to exact punishment from the wicked because they're gluttonous and they all love money and affluence. They build 2 homes for themselves, a summer home, a winter home. Again, if you're in Canada, I think you have to build a winter home because maybe it's too cold in the winter. I don't know. I know I was quite cold over there. I guess it all depends what you're used to. Amalei, so Rabba responds to Abaye, base chorefu, base kites ikri. All right, you see that a base kites is called a bias, but it's not a bias, it's a base choref. You add an adjective. But bias tama, when the Torah says uksavtem al mezuzah beisecha, and it doesn't qualify it by saying summer or winter, is low ikri. It's not called a bias. Esve Abaye, Abaye is going to ask a kasha on Rabbah. Sukkah sachag b'chag Rabbi Yehuda Mechai v'chacham potrim during the 7 days of Sukkot. Rabbi Yehuda says you're chayav in mezuzah, and according to your understanding, it should not be a doraisa because it's not called a bias. V'tani Allah, and yet the Brisa says Rabbi Yehuda Mechayev, number 1 be'erev, number 2 b'mezuzah, number 3 b'maser, which means that if you have many houses that share the same chatzer and you want to set up an eruv chatzeros, you have to have the participation 100% of all the batim that spill into this common chatzer, including a mezuzah including a sukkah that spills into that common chatzer. You see that as far as eruvin is concerned, a sukkah is considered a bias. And as far as mezuzah is concerned, Rabbi Yehuda, as we saw, says that the sukkah is chayav in a mezuzah. All right, the Gemara is going to point out that those could be the Rabbanan. But Maser, the Gemara is going to prove that the din of Maser is a doraisa halacha. That the law is that if you take your produce into the house, then it becomes tevel. And if you take it into your sukkah, Rabbi Yehuda says it is considered as if you took it into your house, and it is tevel. Yechayev in afroshes trumas of maestros. So therefore, v'chitema d'Rabbanan, all right, you can get away with it, and you can reconcile Rabbi Yehuda in Lishkas Farhedrin with the cases here of Erev and Mezuzah, that just like the Mezuzah obligation in Lishkas Farhedrin, according to Rabbi Yehuda's D'Rabbanan, according to your understanding, Rabbah, so too Erev and Mezuzah, which are considered like a bias, each one, that also is only D'Rabbanan. And then you have a consistent shita of Rabbi Yehuda. But what are you going to do with Maser? Or Maser, Mi'ikal, and Meimar, Mi'D'Rabbanan? Is it possible to assume that in the case of Maser, Rabbi Yehuda, who upgrades the status of a sukkah to that of a bias, is only D'Rabbanan? Says the Gemara on top of Yudam and Beis, Dilma Asi Lafrushe Menachiv Halaptur. We're never going to set up a Chiv Tevel and Chiv Maser Midrabbanon, because if the Rabbanon would do such a thing, then they expose themselves to a very, very difficult challenge, a problem that could arise. And that is, people might mistakenly think that once you took the tfuah into the sukkah, and it has a D'Rabbanan status of a bias, they might mistakenly think that Midaraisa it's a bias, and therefore they'll be mafresh from this tevel onto tevel doraisa that was tfuah that was taken into the bias, and they're going to go ahead and eat tevel, which is a chiv misa b'dei shamayim.